Welcome back to the British Chronicle, your window into Britain's stories, memories, and timeless moments. If you enjoy this journey, hit subscribe and turn on the bell so you'll never miss a new story. The Sound of Change, Britain's Everyday Awakening, 1950-1980. What does memory sound like? Perhaps it's the gentle clink of a milk bottle on your doorstep at dawn, the soft murmur of a wireless radio warming up in the kitchen, playing Glenn Miller or the BBC Home Service. Maybe it's the scent of coal smoke from a neighbor's chimney, mingling with the yeasty aroma of freshly baked bread. These aren't just fragments of a forgotten morning, they're portals into another time. Welcome to Britain, beginning in the quiet resilience of the 1950s, a decade still shrouded in the gray fog of war's aftermath. Streets bore the scars of bombing. Ration books lingered in kitchen drawers, yet there was warmth in community, pride in rebuilding, and a shared understanding. Life had to move forward. Then came the 1960s, a burst of color on a monochrome canvas. London danced to the beat of rebellion and freedom. Youth no longer whispered, they roared. Music, fashion, and identity surged into public life with a vividness never seen before. For a moment, it felt as if the world was watching Britain set the tone for a new global rhythm. By the time we reached the 1970s, the mood had changed. The colors remained, but now they were splattered against a backdrop of economic strife, labor unrest, and cultural fragmentation. Power cuts left cities in darkness. Disco lit up underground clubs. Punk screamed through the airwaves like a primal howl. It was turbulent, yes, but unmistakably alive. Across 3 decades, daily life in Britain was a living timeline. Every cup of tea, every bus ride, every evening around the telly told part of the story. This isn't just history, it's memory. And memory, as you'll see, doesn't just inform us, it immerses us. Over the next chapters, we'll step into living rooms with peeling wallpaper, walk down soot-streaked alleyways, and sit in bustling cafes where vinegar soaked the air and jukeboxes played dreams. We won't just remember, we'll relive. The backbone of everyday Britain, 1950-1980 history, often remembers leaders, revolutions, and headlines. But the true architects of a nation's daily life, they rarely make the front page. They were the men with soot on their hands, coal miners, bus drivers, factory workers who clocked in before sunrise and came home with worn-out boots. They were the women who ran the home, not just homemakers, but magicians who turned rations into dinners, who managed tight budgets with tighter resolve. They were the children of austerity, growing up with hand-me-downs, scraped knees, and dreams bigger than their postcodes. These were the faces of Britain's post-war decades, and they weren't alone. Alongside them stood new institutions that quietly redefined what it meant to be British. The NHS, a revolutionary idea, free healthcare for all, born from the hardship of war and the hope of peace. Council housing, rows of brick-built dreams offering dignity to working-class families. Expanding schools, giving more children from more backgrounds a chance to rewrite their futures. Everyday objects became icons of their time. A black and white telly flickering in the corner, watched by a family huddled on the sofa. A Bakelite radio softly crackling the top 40 on a Sunday afternoon. A Raleigh bicycle, the first taste of independence for many kids. The school uniform proudly worn, even if it was a bit too big or patched at the elbows. And then there were the rituals, the small things that shape big memories. The warm hum of a coal stove in winter, the smell of fresh bread at the local co-op. The first time someone walked into a supermarket, staring in awe at aisles of choice. Ration books tucked away, but not forgotten. A single train ticket, clutched tightly by a child on their first seaside holiday. Above all, it was community that defined these decades. Neighbors didn't just live next door, they leaned on each other. Front doors were left unlocked. Cups of sugar were borrowed without hesitation. News spread not by screen, but by whisper over the garden fence. This wasn't a perfect Britain, but it was a connected one. A society held together by routine, resilience, and unspoken understanding. But soon that would begin to change. because after the foundation is laid, the building starts to shift. When the ground shifted, cultural clashes and national crisis, 1950-1980. Not all change comes quietly. Some arrive with blackouts, with rubbish piling in the streets, with guitars played louder than the law allows. The decades between 1950 and 1980 weren't just years of routine and reflection. They were marked by moments of tension, sudden shocks that shook every corner of everyday life in Britain. The 1973 oil crisis and the winter of discontent. It began overseas, but its impact was felt on every British doorstep. Fuel shortages meant power cuts. Shops closed early. Factories went dark. And during the notorious winter of discontent, even warmth was a luxury. Rubbish wasn't collected. Graves weren't dug. Lights flickered or failed altogether. People huddled by gas fires waiting for the electricity to return. If it did, trust in government frayed. Frustration turned to fury. It wasn't just an energy crisis. It was a crisis of confidence in the very system. A nation on strike, from coal miners to nurses, train drivers to teachers. Britain entered a new era of mass industrial action. The picket line became a symbol. Some saw it as solidarity, others as civil collapse. Ordinary lives were caught in the middle. Schools closed, transport halted, everyday routines unraveled, mods, rockers, and the rise of punk. But the rumblings weren't only political, they were cultural. In the 1960s, mods in tailored suits rode Vespas and clashed with leather-clad rockers on seaside towns like Brighton. By the late 1970s, those tensions evolved into something rawer, louder, and more confrontational. Punk. The Sex Pistols didn't just play music, they screamed rebellion. Mohawks, safety pins, ripped shirts. It wasn't fashion, it was war paint. For Britain's youth, this was no longer their parents' country. This was their turn to speak, and they chose to shout. Youth versus establishment. Across schools, pubs, and radio waves, a new identity was forming. Young people rejected old rules, old roles, and old voices. They weren't interested in bowler hats and quiet submission. They wanted volume, color, and a seat at the table. Tension spilled into politics, music, fashion, even dinner tables. The generational divide had never been wider. The post-colonial wave, a changing face of Britain. Meanwhile, in the background of strikes and style revolutions, another transformation was underway. Families from Jamaica, India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh were arriving, part of Britain's post-colonial transition. They brought new food, new sounds, new languages. They also faced suspicion, discrimination, and the challenge of finding belonging. From Notting Hill to Bradford, these new communities shaped British life, but not without struggle. Their arrival added richness and also sparked conversations about identity, race, and what it meant to be British. After the shock, how society shifted behind closed doors. Not all revolutions happen in the streets. Some take place in the living room, at the kitchen table, in quiet glances between husband and wife, parent and child. While Britain was facing strikes, protests, and cultural clashes out in the open, deeper, quieter changes were unfolding inside everyday homes. The breakdown of the traditional family. By the late 1970s, divorce rates were rising sharply. What was once whispered about behind net curtains had become part of the national conversation. Women were no longer expected to just keep house. They were stepping into workplaces, universities, and the public sphere. The idea of a nuclear family began to crack. Dinner wasn't always a family affair anymore. And the phrase single mother stopped being a social scandal and started becoming part of reality. Some saw it as liberation. Others mourned the loss of old roles, old structures. But one thing was clear: the home was changing, and it would never be the same again. A new kind of influence, television and the American dream. The black and white glow in the corner of every front room wasn't just entertainment, it was education, influence, and escape. Children who once played hopscotch on the pavement now sat cross-legged in front of the telly. American shows like Happy Days, Dallas, and Starsky and Hutch brought with them a strange glamour. New slang, new clothes, new ideas of what success looked like. British identity was no longer shaped by the empire or the countryside. It was being shaped by what came through the aerial. And parents? They began to worry. What's happening to our kids? Is this still the Britain we know? The media, from Mirror to megaphone tabloids, screamed about falling morals. TV programs dared to show what was once taboo: premarital sex, interracial couples, teenage rebellion. Some called it progress, others called it the end of decency. Political leaders reacted in kind. Margaret Thatcher's famous phrase, "There's no such thing as society," would soon capture the mood of a changing nation, one moving from community to individualism. What was lost and what was left behind? Amid all this change, many began to feel a creeping sense of loss. The neighborhoods where everyone knew your name, they were fading. The friendly knock on the door, replaced by locked gates and drawn curtains. Children no longer played in the street till dark. People began to miss things they hadn't realized were precious: the warmth of coal fires, the quiet dignity of shared struggle, the unspoken rules of politeness and place. For many, the Britain of old wasn't perfect, but it had heart, humor, and human connection, things that now felt fragile. But even in this shift, something remained, something worth preserving, because from change comes legacy. What still lingers? Legacy, lessons, and cultural echoes. Not everything fades with time. Some things linger. In the smell of toast and Marmite, in the crackle of a vinyl record, in the quiet nod from a neighbor you've known for 40 years. Though Britain transformed between the 1950s and 1980s, economically, culturally, politically, some parts of it remain stitched into the fabric of daily life. Cultural echoes, from retro to revered. What was once everyday has become vintage. Vinyl records, once boxed up in attics, now spin proudly in living rooms again. Retro fashion, miniskirts, flared trousers, paisley prints, parade down high streets once more. Even the humble black and white telly has turned from outdated relic to beloved symbol of simpler times. Nostalgia isn't just a trend, it's a tether, a way to hold on to what mattered when the world felt smaller, closer, and kinder. The quiet strength, work, grit, and community. One legacy that never truly vanished is the British work ethic, the quiet pride of doing a job well, of standing in the rain for a bus at 6 a.m., not complaining, just getting on with it. This was the spirit built by post-war Britain: the miner, the nurse, the cleaner, the shop girl, everyday people who built more than buildings. They built trust, routine, and resilience. It's this silent strength that shaped generations and still shows up in corners of British life today. Modern Britain still bears their imprint. You can still see the fingerprints of that era in the council estates that house millions, in the NHS, still providing healthcare free at the point of use, in the revival of village fairs, street parties, and local fetes. Even in a simple cup of tea shared during hard times, the culture of checking in, showing up, and pulling together still pulses beneath modern life. The gift of memory. Why simplicity still matters beyond systems and styles. Perhaps the greatest inheritance is something less tangible. A memory of how life once was. Slower, smaller, yet fuller. When meals were cooked from scratch, not delivered to your door. When children played with sticks and imagination, not screens. When neighbors knocked, not texted. When time wasn't money, it was shared. These weren't just quirks of the past. They were quiet forms of wealth. They taught us the value of patience, of presence, of people. In a world moving faster than ever, these echoes from the past feel louder and more important, because memory isn't about longing for a perfect world. It's about remembering what was good so we know what's still worth keeping. And sometimes in a forgotten song, a familiar smell, or an old photograph, we find a piece of ourselves. The thread of memory. Looking back to see beyond. From the soot and silence of the 1950s, to the swagger and sound of the 1960s, to the storm and soul of the 1970s. We've walked through 30 years of British life. Not from the viewpoint of kings or cabinets, but through the eyes of the milkman, the factory worker, the teenage mod, the mother warming a bottle on a coal fire. These decades were more than time passing. They were layers. The 50s, warm but worn, stitched with duty and ration books. The 60s, vibrant and defiant, splashed with eyeliner and revolution. The 70s, loud and frayed, electric with conflict, creativity and identity. Each one like a piece of fabric, patched together not perfectly, but purposefully, held fast by memory's thread. But what does this tapestry mean now? Can a generation raised on broadband and Bluetooth feel what it was like to gather around a crackling radio, the whole street quiet except for the hum of the news? Do we still carry those small, silent skills? How to make do, how to neighbor, how to wait. As we rush forward, faster than ever, there's something deeply grounding in pausing and listening to the creak of a gate left unlatched, to the clink of a glass milk bottle long gone, to the echo of a punk chorus in a Camden back alley. These aren't just sounds. They are reminders of how we lived, how we loved, how we made sense of a world that kept changing. Because the past isn't just behind us. It walks beside us in every habit, every saying, every song we hum without knowing where we first heard it. So before we close this chapter, ask yourself, what part of that Britain still lives in you? What stories are still waiting to be told? Not by historians, but by your own memory. And finally, was this truly the full story? Or are we just scratching the surface of a deeper, richer, more mysterious past?